I want to talk to you a little bit today about rethinking our churches in light of recent events. I mean, 2020 has been a crazy year. We're off to a new year. I want you to maybe think about what would we do if we were starting our church all over again today? I have this question that was asked to me long ago. A mentor of mine, we come through a real crisis. We had doubled in attendance, moved to a different building, old bowling alley that we remodeled, ran out of money, ran up a huge amount of debt. Don Stewart resigned from just about a promotion. I mean, just ready to get promoted to be vice president of a large aerospace corporation. He quit that job and came to work for our little church, church about 800 people at the time, shrinking fast. And he just kind of led off with this question, and then he drove it into me over the next, I don't know how many years that we were together, 10, 12 years together on staff. And the question is this: what would we do differently if we knew then what we know today? What would we do differently if we knew then, like when we started, or when we made this decision, or when we made this change? What would we have done differently at that time if we knew what we know now? Because whatever the answer is to that question, that's what we should be doing now, or at least we should be pursuing it. And sometimes that means that you start something new. Sometimes that means that you plan differently. Sometimes that means that you throw away things, a great thing for killing dead horses. But change comes when you ask this question, and it's usually positive change. It's not necessarily reactive, it's proactive, it's always disruptive, and that's a good thing, especially at times like this. So here's the current realities. You may have planned as recently as 2019, but I bet you'd do things differently today if you had to start all over. Your congregation may be 100 years old. It's going to be more difficult for you if you're an old congregation because you have the excess baggage of, well, that's the way we've always done it. And church traditions sometimes really hold us back in some very, very difficult ways. So here's what we're having to deal with. We're having to deal with the pandemic and all the disruption that's been caused by the thing. The fact that people are living their lives online, they're buying online, they're going to the doctor online, they're going to school online, they're getting together for wine parties online, they're watching church online. A lot of people are not even watching church. They've kind of dropped out by the wayside. That has radically changed the world that we live in, and it's not going to go back to normal in just a few months. The country as a whole is much less favorable to the gospel. We know that over 70% of Americans just say, but it's not interested. It's one thing if they hate you, at least they're going to engage you. But when they just ignore you, well, that's a whole nother thing. How do we get past that? How do we break through those barriers? Because they're breakable. You can get there. It's just you're going to have to do things a little bit different. The whole political divide is just, I've had friends. I mean, one guy that I discipled, a man that he's nearly my age. I met him only about 15 years ago, discipled him. He became a pastor, and he chopped me off of Facebook because of something that I posted he didn't like, and he didn't want to be friends anymore. And this is a guy who's going through some immense problems in his life. He needed the friendship. So we're going through these really weird, really critical times. And so we really need to come back and rethink, how are we going to do this? How are we going to make this thing work? Because it is workable. I promise you, there's a future and a hope for your church. So it's really time to just kind of assemble a team, gather some data, and kind of build a new game plan. And so knowing what you do, ask your team. In other words, back to the question, if we knew then what we know now, what would we have done differently? What will we do differently? So you want to ask your team, how would you strategize a new church to include the COVID-related problems and opportunities that have been generated by the pandemic? What kind of meeting space might best serve people conditioned to faith without a lot of programs? Because that's one thing that has really fallen down in the last year, is the whole dependency on programs for churches. So our people are coming back, and those that are coming back, and they're not conditioned to needing these things. What media would best support word of mouth communication of the gospel, because that's really where it's at. That's where it's always been, word of mouth. What can you do? What can you build into your church? Print media, digimedia, daily devotions. What can you do to get people talking to their friends about the gospel? What would you do to best incite pre-evangelistic friendships among your people and their peers? I mean, what we're trying to do is excite people about becoming marketplace missionaries. If we're going to give them a big old heavy rap, they got to preach the gospel, they got to, come on strong, they're not going to do it. They just need to build some friends. They need to drink a lot of coffee with people once they get back into that kind of a world. And then you got to teach them, you got to coach them how to get these conversations started and whatever. How are you going to excite the back in the building folks about the fact that you really do need to maintain an online presence, because there's people who are dependent upon that now, and you're going to have people who are resisting that change? Are DigiChurch and microchurch in your future? Are these things that are useful to you? How could you align, synchronize, and streamline your disciple-making process? Bring a lot of unconnected parts together into one. And, are you going to build micro churches if you try to start a church planting movement? Are you even going to think about a church planting movement? Or are you going to do the launch large mega church? These are questions that I don't know the answers to. You don't know the answers to, but you will if you get your team together and you start to ask these questions. So when do you ask? Well, all the time. I'm not a post-COVID reactionary. This is a well-used practice for me. We've done this all the time. When there have been crises, external crises like 9/11, that was a horrible crisis. The 2008 financial crisis, we had a hurricane that tore through the neighboring island of Kauai when we were on Oahu. We put together a little airline. We actually hired some people and we were freighting stuff into there every day. It really changed the way that we did church for a little while. And then we had a horrible week where one young man in our church died tragically. And 2 days later, there was an airplane crash that took out one of the most prominent leaders in our youth group. Tragic stuff. And so we had to ask these questions over and over. If we knew that this was going to happen, what would we have done different to prepare for it? Because we don't want to be reactive. We want to be proactive. And so times of change require change. Sometimes you have to be reactive. Throwing your service online was a reactive thing in the middle of the COVID. But it's better to peer into the future and to start to say, what can we do? But you're going to better learn the future if you take the data that's available now and you couple it with the things that you did in the past and you go, how would we have done them differently? Because that's really how you should do them now. And so, again, I just want to leave you with this question. If you knew then what you know now. By the way, from now through the end of the month of January, we're offering a free 30-day sampling of the online coaching platform that I have put together. Normally, you get 7 days free. This time you get 30 days free. You can check it out. You can access everything. You can download all the material and then cancel if you want to, because you can cancel at any time. And so if you're interested, go to my website, look at the top, click on coaching plans on the menu, and you find all the data that you need. Hey, thanks for taking time to listen to this.